So I'm Kathy Itomura from Burbank-Valley Garden Club, and we're very happy to present this morning Diane Shader Smith, who will talk to us about her daughter's journal, now a book, titled Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life. Mallory, as most of you know, wrote the book for the GOTTLIEB Native Garden, A California Love Story. And her mother, Diane, is kind of the steam and the brains behind all of the outreach for the GOTTLIEB Native Garden. For example, later on when we want to take a tour of the garden, Susan told us it's Diane we want to talk to. Diane has been very busy this year. Her daughter, Mallory, passed away at age 25. She was a passionate environmentalist. She graduated from Stanford Phi Beta Kappa, and she worked as an environmental writer in lieu of doing field work as an environmentalist. And Diane has been very busy this year talking about her daughter's journal, Salt in My Soul. And this book is, of course, in publication now. There's also a documentary about Mallory's life. As I mentioned, Diane has already spoken more than 180 times at various institutions around the country, schools, universities, hospitals, libraries, including Harvard, Stanford, Yale, the New York Public Library. Her talk is going to be illustrated by more than 150 beautiful slides. She will take questions after, so we will continue to mute ourselves. Diane, would you like to share your screen?
Sure, and I've noticed that people are joining, so maybe if you don't mind monitoring the chat, I let a few people in while you were talking.
Oh, I appreciate that, thank you.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to put my slides up, and I wanted you to see me, but then I'm going to hide myself because it's a very visual talk with 170 slides in 30 minutes. So I talk fairly quickly and cover a lot of material, and then I'll come back on and be present so you can see me afterwards. Okay. Do you see the slides?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
So first of all, Kathy, thank you. It's taken a lot of coordination to get all these talks together, and I have found you to be one of the easiest people to work with so far. So thank you very much for all of your effort. And I also look forward to welcoming everyone to Susan's garden when the time is right for you. And we do tours all the time. So, and tonight we have one with 30 people coming through for cocktails and appetizers. So we enjoy that part. I enjoy that part of my job. Anyway, I'm going to start the story in 1995 when my daughter Mallory was 3 years old, and we learned that she had cystic fibrosis, a degenerative, fatal disease that affects the lungs, the sinuses, and the GI tract. Kids with CF have thick, sticky mucus in their lungs, mucus that traps bacteria and leads to lung function decline over time. Mallory had to do daily treatment to keep her airways and her lungs as clear as possible, and it was incredibly scary. But the doctor did seem hopeful when he told us that the lifespan for children with CF had increased from 5 to 25, and that he expected it to get even longer. But all Mark and I heard was that our child had an expiration date. I was desperate for a way to explain the disease to Mallory and to her brother Micah, but there was no children's book about CF back then. So I wrote one. It's called Mallory's 65 Roses. 65 Roses is what kids hear when adults say cystic fibrosis. That first year, Mallory hated doing treatment. Every day when it was time to start, she would hide in the closet, under the bed, anywhere she thought that we wouldn't find her. So Mark, my husband, made up a game he called Astronaut and Pat Pat. Astronaut was for the mask that delivered her inhaled medications, and Pat Pat was for the chest percussion therapy. We read the book to Mallory's class every September, gave a copy to each of her friends and even the boys when she started dating, because it provided an easy way to explain her illness, which for so long was invisible. This is the book that taught Mallory the power of narrative. My daughter had a very happy childhood, and when she got used to her treatments, she was always compliant. Until one day when she was 9, she refused to do them anymore. So for the first time, we introduced the idea that CF could be fatal and explained it's why she had to do treatment. Mallory listened very carefully and then ran out of the room crying. She did not speak to us for 3 days, but after that, she never missed a treatment. She also started writing, first in a notebook, then at the age of 15 on a computer. She lived every single day knowing she had a chronic illness that would someday kill her. It's why she kept this journal. It's also the reason she started reading a lot. Her words, quote, "I read because there are a lot of things I can't do. I read because I want to see things in my head that aren't there, to know about emotions I've never felt before. So maybe if I do feel them, they will be recognizable. I read because the vast wholeness of existence, the immeasurable, multifaceted beauty of what it means to be human cannot be perceived through one life. Books have taught me compassion. They've taught me to see beyond the bubble I was raised in. They've shown me other experiences, other lives, other worlds. They've awakened my spirit of adventure." Mallory was 12. She was colonized by B. cepacia, a normally harmless bacteria that wreaks havoc in the lungs of CF patients. It's the ultimate superbug, and doctors warned us that things would get way more difficult. So I instituted a rule, a mantra really, no pity party. Mallory went on to adopt her own mantra, which was live happy. Things were okay health-wise in middle school. This is the day of Mallory's graduation, and this is her brother Micah. But high school was another story. She was in and out of the hospital. Her chronic infection required lots of IV antibiotics. But fortunately, Mallory had a lot of supportive friends. They would keep her company in the hospital. And despite all of her health challenges, Mallory was a very typical, high-achieving young woman, family-oriented, a straight-A student, and a 3-sport varsity athlete competing on the volleyball, water polo, and swim teams. To look at Mallory, you would never think that she suffered with any body image issues, but she actually hated the way her body looked when she was at the weight that her doctors wanted her to be at. She also hated the way her body worked, or to be more accurate, the way it didn't work. Digestive problems from cystic fibrosis cause gas and diarrhea. Mallory lived in fear of the fart. She also lived in fear of foods. Her words, "I had a tormented relationship with food in high school, constantly being hungry, but also being afraid to eat, then eating anyway, never knowing how much food to eat or which ones would be good or bad for my stomach." In an email that Mallory wrote to me, she says, "Even though the doctor says I don't have an eating disorder, I have counted my calories very carefully for the last few months, and all of it became part of my daily routine. I don't actually think that I am anorexic, but I do have body image issues." Sadly, when Mallory was at her thinnest and seemingly her happiest, she was most prone to infection and often ended up in the hospital. Fat helps fight infection and becomes a critical component of the body's immune system. Straddling the line between the sick and the well worlds can complicate the development of independence and lead to identity issues. Mallory was no exception to the question that many students ask themselves: who am I? She writes, "Who do I want to be when I grow up? Am I intellectually interesting, fun-loving, and outgoing? Or do I lean more toward quiet and reserved? Will I be the one who partied all the way through college, or the intellectual one who never wanted to party? I don't know who I am. Maybe that's why it's so hard for me to write my college application essay." Second half of Mallory's senior year in high school, she got very sick and she was admitted through pediatrics. And it was so cheerful with large photos of furry animals adorning the walls. But about 10 days in, they said they needed the bed for a young pediatric patient and moved Mallory to an adult floor. Gone was the cheerful decor, replaced by stark white walls with no playful pictures. It was an abrupt change and a foreshadowing of the difficulties to come as she got older and her disease progressed. Nurses working the front lines during our current pandemic report seeing panic in the eyes of their COVID patients. It's eerie how their descriptions mirror Mallory's feelings about this long and scary hospitalization. A social worker introduced Mallory to the idea of a worry box. The theory is writing down your worries and putting them in a box allows you to let go. You open the box when you want to sit with those feelings, and you close it when you want to move forward. For Mallory, sitting with her feelings propelled her to write, "I'm in the intermediate ICU wing of the new hospital. As the days wear on, I find myself panicking as I grow more oxygen dependent, experiencing pain with breathing, no longer able to walk without help. But outside of the hospital, life goes on. My swim team friends are at the peak of training intensity. Graduation speaker auditions are being held. Prom is coming." I could not make Mallory better, but I was absolutely determined to help her get to the prom. Knowing that she had a crush on a boy named Dylan from the water polo team, I asked Coach Bowie, pictured here, if he could help me. He said, "I'm on it." When I told Mallory that Dylan was going to come to the hospital to visit, she could not imagine how that was happening. Of this funny and awkward encounter, Mallory writes, "This afternoon, I'm sitting in my hospital room alone and Dylan walks in with flowers. I have no idea how my mom worked this out, and I'm not really sure that I want to know." The unusual promposal motivated Mallory to work hard to get her strength back. She was desperate to be out of the hospital in time to get to her senior prom. Her hard work paid off. Mallory was so happy, and to her surprise, she was voted prom queen. After languishing in a hospital bed for so many weeks on end, she was grateful to be out with friends. And it was an incredible evening until the after party, when someone threw a smoke bomb into the venue. Mallory's throat started to burn, her lungs were searing, her eyes and her nose were watering, and then hemoptysis, when the airways bleed. Mallory writes of this experience, "Each time I cough up blood, I wonder if this will be the time when the blood spilling up my lungs and out my mouth will burst forth so fast that I can't breathe. The time my hemoptysis is not just a deadly scare, but actually the final swift, deadly bullet." Terrifying moments like this had distilled for Mallory a profound understanding of how lucky she was to be alive, how precarious her life was. In her journal, she quotes Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. The translation of the quote, she writes, "I have to remember everything, collect the wisps, the threads of untidy happenings." Mallory continued to write, to collect her wisps, her untidy happenings. She also decided to audition for graduation speaker. With 600 students in her public school class, competition was stiff. But Mallory was chosen, and in her speech, she quotes the universally respected English philosopher, Winnie the Pooh. "I used to believe in forever, but forever was too good to be true." Mallory chose her words carefully to be relevant to her classmates, but the second, private meaning was inspired by what she refers to as the dark voices in my head, the brokers of hopelessness. Those voices stayed with Mallory in the summer after high school. She was living at the beach because the magical combination of sun and salt helps thin mucus in your lungs. Despite her love of ocean, of sand and sea, despite the smile on her face, Mallory was deeply stressed because for the first time, she had to think about when and how to tell people about her invisible illness when she went off to college. Her perennial smile belied her anguish. She writes, "I am living a double life right now. The life of someone with a very serious illness and very serious complications, but also the life of a student, a friend, an athlete." When Mallory arrived at Stanford in the fall of 2010, she was really nervous. But fortunately, dorm living has a way of establishing immediate intimacy, and word spread quickly, relieving Mallory of the burden of disclosure. It was still a very difficult transition. because after growing up with a helicopter mom, Mallory desperately wanted to be independent. At the same time, she knew that having my help made things much easier. She had to learn how to juggle her academic, social, and medical responsibilities to fit everything in. Over time, she adjusted, studied hard, went to football games, and played club volleyball, despite many dozens of hospitalizations. In total, there would be 67, with admissions ranging from weeks to months. In Mallory's junior year, she worked as a peer health educator in a freshman dorm, and she was responsible for the social and emotional health of the residents. She would often say that the job description should include sexual health, because as the dorm sanctioned provider of condoms, that is really all that the students wanted to talk about or get from her. It wasn't until taking this job that Mallory felt like she really belonged at Stanford. During a writing exercise with her freshman residents, she started to see a pattern, that they were stressed and didn't feel that they deserved to be at Stanford. Mallory was able to reassure them that she had felt the very same way and writes about the duck syndrome. When students are like ducks gliding on the water, what no one sees is that underneath they are paddling furiously. Mallory would write, the stress of working to make things seem effortless creates a vicious cycle of silence and struggle. This applies to physical and mental health issues. Mallory had both. To manage her anxiety, Mallory spent time in nature whenever possible. She cared deeply about the environment. In her senior thesis, she compares the degradation of her lungs by the colonization of a superbug to the degradation of native Hawaii by the colonization of foreigners. Mallory recorded the piece as a podcast called Biome, and it was played on NPR. The analogy Mallory draws helped her process what was happening to her body. It was terrifying. Of her fears, Mallory writes, my memory, nearly photographic at times, serves me well in school, but it curses me at night. My internal hallucinations are so haunting, I can't escape them, even when I close my eyes, because the images play on my eyelids as if projected on a movie screen. It's scary to think I might look back and realize I could have done amazing things, but didn't because fear held me back. Fear protects us from dangerous things. Unwarranted fear prevents us from reaching our full potential. It has been crushing to learn that Mallory suffered so much. Her emotional pain was never addressed until I pushed for a psych consult. Doctors were so focused on her survival that they missed the signs of mental distress. Despite her demons, Mallory did reach her potential and graduated from Stanford Phi Beta Kappa, so excited to do field research. But sadly, the doctor said no to every project she asked about because exposure to environmental toxins would further damage her lungs. She was devastated. No one understood her distress. Mallory still looked so happy that many thought she was the golden girl who had it all. My daughter would have traded everything for the chance to take a breath that didn't hurt, to have a life that wasn't defined by illness. As her body deteriorated, she sharpened her mind, crystallized her thinking, and honed her writing skills. She would write, I am limited in what I can do, but not in what I can say. Cystic fibrosis does a lot of taking, of dreams, of time, of travel, of friendships, of freedom, of potential, of plans, of lives. But you can't be negative. Negative feelings hurt creativity, the very same creativity that will help you reinvent your possibilities and achieve your ends. Mallory fought hard to reinvent her possibilities without giving up on her dream of working in environmental education. So instead of doing field work, she got hired to write a book, The GOTTLIEB Native Garden, a California love story about the importance of using native plants and gardening for wildlife. Conservation, even to those committed to stewardship, can often seem unobtainable. The publication of this book enabled Mallory to realize that she could still make a difference despite her own personal limitations. The book received a lot of acclaim, But when Mallory should have been with Susan out on book tour, her infection reignited, landing her back in the hospital for a long stretch of time. While her friends were grappling with normal post-college questions, Mallory was dealing with IVs, ICUs, and indignities, like having doctors and nurses ask about her bowel habits in front of her friends, even when she repeatedly asked them not to. It was humiliating. Mallory was also in excruciating pain, 3 different times, 3 different hospitals, once for pleurisy, once for a pulmonary embolism, and then again after transplant. The opioid epidemic, with 128 people dying every day from overdose, has left the medical community working to regain control over prescribing patterns. As a result, well-meaning doctors would routinely underprescribe pain meds to Mallory out of their fears of creating another addict, even though she was an inpatient and doctors were monitoring every dose. She writes about her distress at inadequate pain management. And yet, at another point, she writes about her own fears of getting addicted. With morphine and oxy, there is no pain. There is no sadness. I never thought I would say this, but I have come to love the feeling of being on opioids. They were never part of my treatment, but as my chest pain became unbearable, I needed them to breathe. They also helped with my mood. After college, the issue of when to disclose her invisible illness resurfaced. She worried about burdening new friends and about scaring potential employers. In one anecdote I can share, Mallory interviewed for a writing job with a computer who said she was perfect and loved her sample submissions. They offered her a great job with a high salary and benefits, but after she told them she had CF, they decided it was not a good fit and they withdrew their offer. She was deeply disappointed. Mallory also feared that no man would love her enough to accept the complications of her disease, so she often held back. But there was something about Jack, her real-life Prince Charming, that left her wrestling with the decision of what and when to disclose. They first met on New Year's Eve in 2015. Mallory had just gotten out of the hospital and she was on IVs. She thought Jack was super cute and very nice, but since she was living in LA and he was living in Palo Alto, she did not give him a second thought. It was too hard to have a relationship, let alone have it be a long distance one. Months later, after Mallory moved back up north, they re-met at a party and they were playing a game of spikeball when she felt a bout of hemoptysis coming on, so she ran into the bathroom to cough up blood. When she came out, she had blood on her shirt and she was very pale, so Jack expressed concern. She downplayed the seriousness of the situation and asked herself, will this cute, smart guy who's there when I'm laughing and lighthearted also be there when I'm sick and sedated? She made the decision to disclose. It's a good thing she did, because a few days later, she ended up back in the hospital for that bout of hemoptysis. It was the first of many more admissions to come. The antibiotics had stopped working, and the only option left was transplant. The 2 centers where Mallory had been a patient for most of her life turned her down for transplant because of her superbug. Mallory felt abandoned by her CF teams. I regret that I did not push harder for them to have a conversation with her. Didn't they owe her that? I begged them to keep trying to find a hospital that would evaluate her, and with little hope, we decided to stop treatment and head to Hawaii. If she was going to die, I wanted her to be near the ocean, which she loved so much. For 6 magical days, Mallory was oxygen and IV free. She got to surf, swim, paddleboard. This photo was taken 1 year before she passed away. On day 7 of that trip, the fever started and shot up to 103.5. Mallory was admitted to the Maui hospital. They didn't know anything about Cepacia or have the medications she needed, so we asked her brother Micah to fly to Oahu. He did, and he returned with 60 pounds of IV balls. We were going to stay put until Mallory was stable to fly. But then the national news announced the worst hurricane in decades was headed straight for Maui, so we scrambled to get out on one of the last planes before they closed the airport. In the midst of all this utter chaos, we got a call from UPMC that Mallory was approved for evaluation. She was all smiles despite her high fever, and I was ecstatic, but the coordinator said not to get excited. She'd seen too many people get approved for evaluation, but then be denied coverage. I said, that won't happen. My husband is a lawyer and he has fought every denial. And I'm a publicist, so I will go on the Today Show and expose their refusal to pay. But Mallory was denied. Getting insurance approval for an out-of-state, out-of-network hospital was the most excruciating non-medical challenge we faced. The battle raged for weeks. They employed multiple stall tactics that Mallory felt were intended to run out the clock on her life. It would take a miracle to turn no into yes. We got the miracle. It came in the form of a close friend who knew someone at the highest level of our insurance company's management. Mallory did not want to accept the evaluation. She felt guilty that others with cystic fibrosis had not been able to overturn their own denials and had died waiting. I urged Mallory to use her privilege, her access, and the power of the pen to expose this injustice. She documents the entire battle and writes that insurance companies are inflicting needless additional suffering on patients who are already in distress. It's outrageous and incomprehensible. In early October of 2016, Mallory and I flew to Pittsburgh for a grueling week, meeting the various teams that had to weigh in on her case. We were on pins and needles waiting to hear from the transplant team. They had said they would call on Monday or Tuesday, but they didn't, so we were highly anxious. They did call the next day, which was Wednesday, Mallory's 24th birthday, to say they were accepting her as a candidate for transplant, but that at 40% lung function, she was still too healthy to come. We were so lucky to have more time. But in a twist of fate, 1 week later, Mallory got the flu and mono, and then UPMC said she might not be able to be transplanted after all. She was just too sick. There is a fine line between being too sick for transplant and not sick enough. Mallory stayed in the hospital for most of November, December, and January until she was finally stable to fly. The call came on a Monday with instructions to fly on Thursday, so Mallory could be in clinic on Friday, which gave us 2 days to pack up our lives for the cross-country move and say goodbye to everyone, knowing she might not make it back. This is the day we left for Pittsburgh. Mallory is hugging her brother Micah on the left. But when we arrived, Mallory was happy and hopeful. To a patient with end-stage lung disease who's listed for transplant, you have to get a phone call, the most important one you'll ever get. It's the one that comes when they're calling to say that lungs are available. With the scarcity problem, that call can come days, weeks, months, or years after you're listed. And once you are listed, every time the phone rings, you jump. You can't exercise, take a shower, watch a movie, or sleep through the night without your phone being right there, which intensifies the experience, but you can't miss a single call. As the days and weeks pass, your heightened vigilance gives way to hopelessness because you start to feel like that call is never going to come. Or if it does come, it will be too late. At that point, I changed my mantra to somewhere over the rainbow, there are lungs. I used to sing it to her, that first line, over and over and over. About 6 weeks later, the call came. So we packed, raced to the hospital, and waited 24 hours. In the morning, the surgeon came in to tell us that the lungs were viable, but they were actually going to go to another patient. We were blindsided. Mallory did not know that she was a backup candidate, and we didn't even know that that was actually a thing. In total, Mallory experienced 3 dry runs, false alarms where you're called to the hospital, prepped for transplant. They don't let you eat for 24 hours. And then you find out that either the lungs aren't viable or they went to someone else. Mallory writes about the emotional and physical toll this took on her. But finally, on September 11 of 2017, Mallory got the 4th and final call. Despite her fear, Mallory was so excited. She was wheeled in for a 9-hour surgery and received the gift of life, new lungs. The recovery was grueling, but 1 month later, we were celebrating her 25th birthday without oxygen. Those days, I would sing to her, "Somewhere over the rainbow there were lungs," and you can see the rainbow on her cake and the smile on her face. It was the happiest time as we dared to dream about a new life back in California without oxygen. But tragically, just a few weeks later, as it so often happened, Mallory was readmitted with pneumonia, and doctors started preparing me for the worst. They wanted me to tell Mallory that she was not going to make it. I refused. As Mallory's mom, I felt it was my decision. I knew she was terrified of dying, and I did not want her to be afraid. We also needed Mallory to have hope, because in these last days of her life, Mark was working around the clock to get an experimental treatment for her. He had read that phage therapy was used 100 years ago, but then penicillin was discovered. With its patent protection and financial incentives, penicillin rendered work on phage obsolete. Since phages are naturally occurring organisms, patent protection would be a huge problem. Mark enlisted the help of Stephanie Strathy, an epidemiologist who had used phage therapy to save her husband. On November 7th, she sent out this nationwide tweet, and many labs responded. Meanwhile, at the doctor's urging, our closest friends and family flew across the country to be with us. Because Mallory was on a ventilator, she scribbled a note, this note, which says, "Can't talk at all, but so grateful you are all here for the hardest part." On November 14th, the United States Navy found a phage match for Mallory's isolate of Cepacia. Dr. DeCuna from UPMC came up with an elaborate plan to send their organ retrieval plane and then a helicopter to get it from the Navy's lab to the airport and then to the hospital. We were so ecstatic and hopeful when those phages arrived. They're in the box in the white on the left. On the right is a photo. That night, Mallory made history and became the first patient with cystic fibrosis to receive phage therapy. But the very next morning, doctors advised us that Mallory had been without oxygen for too long and said we should make the gut-wrenching decision to remove life support. After she died, we asked for an autopsy and learned from the Navy that the phages had started to work. She just didn't get them in time. Mallory was not able to save his daughter, but he knew that phage therapy would save others. We shared Mallory's story with the media, a story that starts in 2016 with Mark's dogged pursuit of this treatment and includes Stephanie Strathy's critical contribution. Stat News reported that Mallory died, but her bacterial infection lived on, moving to a medical lab in Jerusalem, where 3 students found a second phage effective against Mallory's strain of Cepacia. They named the bacteria-killing virus BC Mallory 1. BC for Burkholderia cepacia, the name of the superbug. Mallory after my daughter, and number 1 because she was the first patient to inspire this. While all of this was happening, Mark, pictured in yellow, was dipping for phages in a sewage treatment. He had a plan, a vision really, to treat kids with CF with phage therapy before infection ravaged their lungs. A vision that has led to the first NIH-funded clinical trial for patients with cystic fibrosis. Helping others still in the fight has helped Mark with his grief. As for me, I turned to Mallory's journal. In the last months of her life, she had given me the password. When I opened it, I found 2,500 pages of her reflections over 10 years. The playful writings of a teenager, the somber insights of a young woman facing death, and clear instructions for me to publish the parts that might help others. Mallory wanted to leave her mark on the world. So did Katy Perry, one of her favorite singers. Katy has publicly said, "I can't just be the one that sang 'I Kissed a Girl.'" And yet that was such an important song. It opened the door for conversation about sexual fluidity and LGBTQ+ identities. We don't always realize the impact we're making. Legacy can be music, art, a physical gift. It can be something that you leave in people, not for them. Perhaps you want to affect global change. Susan Gottlieb wants that. Or have it be about your character. Mallory wanted her words to matter. She writes, I have a strong urge to do something that will change people, that will have an infectious influence on the way they think and feel that will last. I want it to be like handing them a pair of glasses, giving them a way of seeing something they didn't even realize they weren't seeing. Mallory also had a profound interest in memory. In her words, in how, as time goes on, what was once vivid, real, present, becomes slippery and vague and trickles away like water cupped in your hands. It's why she documented everything. Mallory was a gifted storyteller who created poetry out of prosaic experience. She writes in detail about her treatments, the love and unexpected community that she found within the hospital, the transcendent intimacy she developed with her beloved care teams, and the problems imposed by the medical system that she depended upon. Despite the serious subject matter, Salt in My Soul is at its core a snapshot of a coming of age, an intimate portrait of a young woman living her life. Mallory writes about topics that so many of us relate to: the importance of deep and meaningful friendships, her longing for love, and most heartbreaking to me, her intense desire to have a child. People have asked if I learned anything from reading her journal. The big surprise was that her facade of perfection masked a darker truth about experiences and emotions that she had not dared to share publicly. Mallory lived happy, but in her journal, she expresses anger at her disease and what living with a disability does to a person. She did often say that writing helped heal her. I just wish that she had gotten to see that her writing is healing others. She leaves a legacy in her wisdom and in her words, the salt in her soul. Thank you.
Well, Diane, I just wept through a lot of that, happy tears and sad ones too. I think you and Mark are total heroes. I bet people have questions. If you do, go ahead and unmute yourselves.
How about seeing people's faces? That would be nice.
Yes, I'm going to show all videos now if I can figure out how to do it. And everyone, please reach down and unmute yourselves.
I see Anna.
Hi, Diane.
Hi. I was telling Kathy that when I do talks and everybody's quiet, I say I either did such a good job that you have no questions, or I did such a bad job that you have no questions.
No, just taking it all in, speechless
Wow.
for a moment.
Yeah, I've come to understand that this is what happens. It's been 3.5 years and I'm still processing.
Kathy, it won't let us turn on our videos because you had blocked it. So
I'm trying to unblock it. You sound like you know what I should do.
I wish I knew.
Okay, allow to unmute, allow to rename, ask all to unmute. Well, I'm just going to go through and ask you to start your video, and that ought to give you permission, right?
I won't let you.
I would think.
Then since I won't be able to see you raise your hand, please just begin talking. I know that you have questions, and I'll continue working on what I'm doing here.
That was so powerful. My goodness. What a story. Wow.
Okay, this is good. I'm starting to see people.
Who just spoke just now?
I'm Martha.
Oh, hi. We don't see you,
Hi.
but
I know. I see you.
oh, okay. Oh, there you are. Is that you? Are you Robin Jamil?
Oh, I'm here. I just
was trying to get a better vantage point. I got light behind me.
Well, it's an important story for me to tell for so many reasons. First of all, it shares her words with people, which she wrote for 10 years. It introduces people to phage therapy. It talks about invisible illness and mental health illness and body image issues and a lot of things that different people struggle with. So it is relevant across the board. And then of course her environmentalism, which I could do a whole talk on that, but each talk is, you know, it just touches people in different ways.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
After being a nurse for over 45 years, I've actually taken care of a number of patients who have had CF. Oh, wow. And I do know, as you pointed out in your presentation, that the lifespan has significantly improved, which offers people a lot of hope, no doubt. And I also know that our healthcare system, early on in my career, actually was rather responsive and did a great job. But myself and other of my colleagues look at what's happening and are rather disappointed. I was wondering, based on your experience as a parent, how or what do you see as something that needs to be done in healthcare in order to kind of bridge some of the problems that you encountered?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because I'm working on another talk with a doctor and a mom, and it's the three perspectives that you see, which is the patient, the parent, and the provider. And the point of that talk is to get people to incorporate what they call narrative medicine, which is really opposite from what's happening now with the pressure on doctors and nurses to move patients through the system and to bill as many different things as they can. And they don't spend a lot of time talking to the patients, in hearing their stories. And so part of what this talk is meant to do is to give the perspective of the patient and to remind people that they're not just a patient, but they are a person. And so the improvement in communication and a change in the way the doctors are able to bill, I think can help a lot, because I think there's a lot of rushing because they want them to submit a lot of different reimbursement forms, and they don't take the time. And I think electronic medical records, where I don't know if you've all been to the doctor and yes, they're doing this, they're asking you questions, they're going, okay, tell me about your liver, tell me about your kidney, and they're trying to type it up. And the electronic medical record, which supposedly was supposed to help things, has depersonalized medicine in such a way that it even further erodes the relationship. And so that's one of the things I'm working towards with the talk that I'm doing now and the one that's coming up.
Oh, well, I have, audience would very much appreciate when you do go to that audio, you know, that format that you're going to teach, because I like what you just said, that is the person, not disease or the chronic problem. And so often the person gets lost. And that's the sad part of what we do, for whatever reasons gotten lost. But anyway.
I just wanted to comment also. I thought, wow, why can't the adult patient's room look a little bit friendlier? Those two photos you showed of when she transitioned from the kids to the adults, it really, you know, would that help?
Well,
does color help?
I'll tell you something. So after that experience, it was at UCLA Hospital. I worked with the hospital and I got Susan Gottlieb to donate photos from her garden, and they're in the lower level when you walk into Ronald Reagan UCLA Hospital. There's a beautiful exhibition. We tried to get one for every room and she would have gladly paid for it, but you'd be surprised how hard it is to get art approved on a wall in a hospital. And there was a man named Howard Ruby who took the photographs that you saw of the polar bear. That's an actual photo from UCLA. And there was some relationship where I think he wasn't allowing other photos in the room. I don't know, but we did arrange for photos. And I do think we know that spending time in nature and having healing gardens in hospitals is very, very helpful. And it's interesting because some people didn't initially understand why I inserted my talk into this talk series. And I don't mean on Susan's side, because she of course wanted it, but they said, well, we don't really see the connection. And I said, there's such a huge connection between spending time in nature and your health, and every single person will have to deal with a health issue at some point. So
yes.
Yes. So anyway, I think people hear the story and they're like, oh, okay, we get it. But
well, there's all kinds of research out there to support that too. I worked in oncology in a local medical center, and that's one of the therapeutics that we did, was put people out into the gardens. So yes, and as a side note, I'm a master gardener since I've retired. One of the elements of a master gardener program is now looking at nature and wellness.
I think that's very
so they're doing more of talk of how this is relevant.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to remind everybody, I'm so encouraged that everyone has stayed for the after talk here. At some point, if you continue to stay, I'm going to do the wheel of names and draw 5 names for fortunate people who are going to get a free copy of Mallory's book. But I see Marlene raised her hand, so let's hear what Marlene, what your question is.
Yeah, my question is, with this phage therapy that they have started doing, are they using that on patients now, or is it still in a testing point and not being used yet?
I'm glad you asked that question. Not every audience is interested in it, but I think it's the most important thing. Oh, Sandy Keaton is saying I can't get my video to come up. But yes, let me answer that question. A lot of progress has been made. COVID, in weird ways, moved it forward and also moved it backward, because a lot of the people that were working on phage therapy research had to become, part of an all hands on deck to treat COVID. However, they took bacteriophage therapy and used it to treat 8 to 10, I think maybe 10 patients in a Texas hospital that had been put on ventilators and developed secondary bacterial infections from being on the vents. And eight people received phage therapy and lived. And there have been anecdotal cases around the world, not just in the United States. And one man was supposed to have his leg amputated because the infection had taken over his foot and gone up his leg, and they used phage therapy, and he was successfully treated and got to avoid amputation. There have been some other people. And so as a result, the NIH is now funding, and the Yale group that's working on it, there are 2 doctors, Dr. Ben Chan and Dr. John Koff, and they are doing what they call compassionate care and expanded access. So sort of single one-off cases where they think they can help, and they find a match between the bacterial isolate and the phage. But they're doing a single center trial, while UC San Diego, where Stephanie Strathy and her colleague, Dr. Chip Schooley work, they're starting in the fall a multi-center trial, and that's specifically to test phages against Pseudomonas, one specific kind of bacteria. But there's a huge push underway because so many people have this superbug and resistance problem. And it was considered to be one of the fastest growing and most pressing global health issues of our time until COVID hit. And then of course we had to deal with that. So there is a lot of attention being paid to phage therapy now, and using Mallory's book and talking 188 times has absolutely moved the needle, because I've gone and spoken at hospitals that hadn't heard about it. And then I put doctors in touch with the people that are doing it, and they're now doing it as in the research stage in a bunch of hospitals across the country. So that's good.
Hey. that is so encouraging.
Anne, I see you have a question.
Right. Thank you, Diane. I so admired your presentation. It was wonderful and sad. And I'm wondering, as a parent, how you dealt with going through that process with your daughter. Were you part of a grief support group, or did you just do it on your own?
Well, shortly after my daughter passed, like within a few weeks, some other mother in my neighborhood who I did not know, but who knew a lot of my friends, lost her son to an accidental overdose. Mm-hmm. And then a few months after that, another woman had a 10-year-old boy who went to sleep and didn't wake up. He had some undiagnosed heart, and he was a perfectly healthy kid. And then another woman had her son had a drug overdose. So the four of us came together and formed an informal support group. 3 of us have gone on to do very powerful and what we consider to be important things. For example, for me, it's phage therapy. And for the woman who lost a 10-year-old, it's now the power of play and trying to build fields in places where there are fields. And then the woman whose son had the accidental overdose due to mental illness, she's now working in the mental health space. One of the other women, the 4th person, she decided that she didn't like our way and it was uncomfortable. And so she has parted ways with us, but I still 3.5 years later meet regularly and talk almost daily to them because they are the only people that I think really understand what it's like. I think people think I'm out there, I'm touring, I'm doing all kinds of things that I'm sort of over it or I've made peace with it. But that's not how it works at all. So I'm hoping none of you have lost a child.
No, thankfully.
Sandy?
Yes, I can't, for some reason my video won't come up, but I really want to thank you for your presentation. It was very moving. One of my audiology colleagues' nephew had, one of my audiology colleagues that I worked with a long time ago had a nephew with CF, and she shared so much of what the family went through. It was,
yeah, it's a terrible
it's just very moving and very devastating. And thank you so much for being so open about it.
Well, it's helpful to me too, because the worst thing that happens when your child dies is you think everybody's going to forget them. So it gives me a way to continue to talk about her without driving my regular day-to-day friends crazy. You know, they are very sweet and supportive, but you know,
I think it's hard for people to understand too. They want to do what's right, but not everybody even knows what to do.
Right, right. Well, I also am in touch with another woman. She's the woman who's going to be doing this other talk. We're not in a grief group together, but we're going to do a talk together. She lost her daughter 1 year before me. And I remember I reached out to her right when her daughter died. She also had to move to UPMC because the only place that would transplant her was Pittsburgh. Her daughter also had cepacia, and her daughter was also blonde and beautiful. And when her daughter died, I reached out and I really wanted to be close to her and connect with her. And she basically said, I can't, you have hope and I don't. Then when Mallory died, she reached out to me, and now here we are almost 4 years later working on a talk that we're going to do together, because she has a book that just came out. It's called Little Matches, and it's the same journey, but from the perspective of the mom, and Mallory's is from the perspective of the patient. And then there's another doctor that his name is David Weil, and his book is called Exhale, and he's the doctor we're working with. So we call it the triangle, which is the three perspectives that all need to work together in order to get better outcomes. By the way, I wanted to tell you, if more than 5 people want the book, I don't profit from this in any way. We donate all the profits to research, and we've donated $150,000 to UCSD, $25,000 to Yale, and like a $5,000 grant to Mayo Clinic for EVLP. And so I'm happy if somebody wants a book to people who donate books. So I don't not read it just because you don't have it.
But it is available, yes, in bookstores.
Oh, it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
Okay.
But if some, I recognize a lot of people, it's to them. I mean, I know this, especially from the CF community. I'm on the CF Mamas Facebook page, and so many people reached out and said, I can barely afford to pay for my medicines. I want to read the book. This was when it was in hardback. And now it's in paperback because it's been out for a couple of years. And in addition to doing it in paperback, we can buy it in bulk. So we're able to get it for a very inexpensive price. And, for me, it's a labor of love. It's not about making any money. So I'm happy to send it to somebody that doesn't want to get it themselves or can't get it themselves.
So Diane, should people contact you or
sure,
they can contact me and I could
either
forward
way,
it?
I don't mind if you take my email address. I also if, you know, it's interesting because a couple of garden groups have asked, oh, really? Why, you know, why are you giving this talk? So if you do think it was relevant and helpful, if you could send me a note, I could pass that on. That'd be great. And you can give my email address to anybody that might want it.
All right. Are there specific questions now for Diane, Robin?
Yeah, I was wondering, the GOTTLIEB Native Garden book that was written by Mallory, can you tell a little bit about what that book is about? Is it her personal experience or?
It's Susan's story. It's Susan. So Susan created this urban oasis, right, and she believes that native plants can save the world. And so Mallory writes all about it. And I guess did you hear Susan's talk or no?
Yes, but is it Mallory writing about the garden?
Yeah,
Mallory.
It's nothing to do with Mallory. She's just the writer. It's all, Mallory's story is in Salt in My Soul, but all of the GOTTLIEB Native Garden, A California Love Story, is about the garden and about Susan and about the importance of native plants. And there's a lot of sidebars in there, and there's a lot of people interviewed. So people really like it. And that book did really well. So she was actually supposed to write the second book, which is The GOTTLIEB Native Garden, An Intimate Wildlife Journey. But then she passed away. And Scott, who's the naturalist who you'll be hearing from, who has the most stunning pictures, he didn't really want to make it into a heavy textbook. He really wanted to show the photos and then give talks. So he gives a lot of information. So make sure you sign up to come and hear his talk as well. And fortunately, Susan pays our salaries. That's how I can afford to donate all my time and donate books. So we're
thank you, Susan, too.
Yeah.
Where are you all? Are you all located in Culver City or Burbank?
Oh, we're actually in Burbank, but we're the Burbank-Valley Garden Club. So there are members in front of you today who are from all over the San Fernando Valley. And maybe even other places. I don't know where you're from, Kim.
I'm from Santa Clarita.
There you are, another valley.
Well, it's not too far to get to Susan's because she's up off of Coldwater Canyon.
Right.
And so if you come up Coldwater Canyon right before sunset, you turn off. And so
I think I'll go ahead and share my screen right now and do this Wheel of Names thing. I think I have everybody's name in here. And so we're going to do this 5 times. Okay, Kim, you are a winner. I know you're here because you just said. You have to be here. Marlene, are you still with us?
Still here.
Great, you're a winner. Janet, I know you're here. I saw you. You didn't speak, but I saw you. Harriet, are you still here?
I am. Thank you so much. And
Great.
It was a wonderful, inspiring speech. Thank you.
I know, huh?
And we're planning to go to the GOTTLIEB.
Yes, of course. So let's see. I have to write this down or I forget it. That was Harriet. All right.
This is a very cute what do you call it? Spinning wheel thing. I've never seen that.
I'll send you the link to it. It's free. Okay, who is B? Is that Sandy?
No, it's me. My name is Becca.
Oh, hi, Becca. All right. Do you want this book?
I do.
You're the winner. That is 5. Yay. That's 5 names. All right, now I'm going to close this share and come back. If there are still questions for Diane, do you still have time, Diane?
Oh, sorry. I actually have a few more minutes, but I do have another meeting I have to go to. So,
all right.
I'm available by video. I mean, by email, if anybody has any questions, and hopefully I'll welcome you all to the GOTTLIEB Native Garden.
You will. You will. Thank you very, very much. Yes, I'm gonna say goodbye to Diane.
Thank you. All right. It was nice to meet all of you. I appreciate your taking the time. I have to say to Greg, I'm impressed there's a man in the midst.
Oh, he's so active.
It's great. Some male energy.
Yes, yes. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye. And if you want more books, please let me know.
Thank you.